everyone. Welcome back to our home libraries. For today's episode, we're going to be discussing A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. It has been a minute since we published an episode on this, so why the heck not? This book does kind of follow the events of A Court of Wings and Ruin, but it's no longer being told through Feyre's perspective. Instead, we're following Nesta and Cassian. And we are going to ruin this book for you. If this is something you're interested in reading and you don't want it to be spoiled, make sure you stop listening before we get to the questions, but do come back and give this a listen once you have read it. Be sure to head over to our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube channel to check out some additional content. All of those are Our Home Libraries, plural, because we're two people. And before we get too far into this episode, you should probably make sure that your children are not listening in, because it's going to get dirty. Like, this book gets real dirty, and I cannot promise what words are going to come out of my mouth. So
yeah, this book was a little much in comparison to the other books that we've read so far.
For sure. Sarah was like, I'm going to give you all the smut.
It was quite a bit. As Karey mentioned, this does follow, or it's a continuation of the events that we saw in the first three books that we read.
Yeah.
So during the war that we saw in the final book, in Feyre's perspective, we have Nesta embedded in a lot of things going on with this war. And we see that the events of this war with Hybern have significantly impacted her. Hybern's attempt to manipulate her through her father, Hybern abducting Elaine, Hybern murdering her father right in front of her, attempting to manipulate Cassian. All of this has led her to the conclusion that caring about people is bad. Anyone she cares about can be used against her. And she just kind of shuts all that down. She disregards essentially Cassian. Cassian declared his love for Nesta during
pretty much
the last book. Yes. And she's just, this book picks up with her not even acknowledging that. And she's just not in a good place. She's sleeping around. She's drinking excessively. She's going to music halls and bars and is not talking to any of the people that genuinely love her. She's shut them all off. She's even got into a fight with Amryn, who was kind of her closest friend up to this point, and now they are no longer speaking. We don't know what it's about. So she has really isolated herself. Her family finally decides, enough is enough. They tried to give her space. They knew she was reeling from the war. They gave her an ultimatum. Either she moves up to the House of Wind and trains with Cassian, or she goes back to the Mortal Lands alone. It's obvious to us that Cassian has this attraction to Nesta.
Yeah.
And while he's training her, he's also dealing with the aftermath of this war. It's impacted everybody. So the wall doesn't exist anymore, and there's still the issue between the queens and Nesta. So we're going to see all that unfold, as well as the utilization of, we saw him in the other books, but Lucien's older brother, Eris, is now part of communication with the Inner Circle. He's still kind of in an alliance with them, and we see him as kind of a go-between for Nesta and the rest of the Court of Dreams, as we all remember them from the last book, as they are dealing with, like I mentioned, these queens. So we'll see where that takes us for this book.
Yeah, it's interesting because Cassian kind of gets a new job in this book, because he's typically thought of as the general. He does all the fighting and the training and deals with the Illyrians and stuff. But in this book, we kind of see him take on the role of emissary. So he's primarily responsible for communicating with Eris. And let's just say he's not very good at being an emissary. It seems like you can read every emotion on his face when he's talking to you. So yeah, that's not good if you're trying to keep secrets. But anyway, we can kind of get into the ratings and our general review of this book. Because of the excessive, and when I say excessive, I mean an astronomical amount of smut and dirty language, I gave this a 3. I mean, I still like the story. So
I gave it a little bit higher. I said a 4 out of 5. The smut, I don't think was really necessary. I would agree that some parts of it you're like, okay.
Okay.
But I'll kind of touch upon also why I think that it was okay to be used in this book as we go through some of the questions. I think the story was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing more of Cassian, more of Nesta, and exploring how they both dealt with this, huge trauma. And I think that that's something that Sarah J. Maas does really well, because we saw the same thing of Feyre in book 2, where she was dealing with the trauma after being under the mountain. So she's not afraid to tackle these really hard topics of grief and loss and trauma and how everyone handles it differently. And I felt like
Yeah.
this was really interesting because we see someone who's a different personality handling trauma in a very different way than Feyre did. So I liked it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely important to see how different individuals can deal with similar events and how different perspectives of the same event can shape how a person has to try to heal from these types of things. But kind of getting into the questions, which came from my brain, we've always seen Nesta from Feyre's perspective as like kind of irritable, very prideful, and this is just a nice way to say she's kind of bitchy. But nobody presses her buttons more than Cassian. And Nesta is super reluctant at first to do this training thing, but Cassian is eventually able to convince her to give it a go, namely by making a bargain with her, which we all know bargains, like, you can't break them if you're dealing with a fairy, so kind of a big deal that he would offer that. But of course, this is going to lead to a physical relationship because some pretty dirty scenes. So, how do you feel about the spice level in this book? I do feel like this is probably one of the dirtiest books that we have read for this entire podcast.
I would argue that the Tessa Bailey one was worse.
Yeah, that one was bad, but at least it was like condensed. Like this was 700 pages.
Yeah. I mentioned it when I was kind of giving the synopsis, but I think that the reason why we saw this amount of like spice or physicality, however you want to view it, is because of these two characters. They both, I feel like, communicate more in a physical way. We see them needing physical like work and training and all that to work through stuff as well. They both feel better from that. So I feel like that was Sarah J. Maas's way of like showing also how they worked through things. We see them, that's how they can connect originally until they could get to the point where they could like talk about things. That is why I think it's used. Some of it was a little much, but I liked it.
Yeah, I gotta be entirely transparent. There are a few words, and here's why I said that maybe your children should not be listening. There are a few words in smut that genuinely make me uncomfortable when they are overused. Okay, the word cock is one of those, and I swear every single sentence had that word. And I was like, this is just too much. Can we be a little bit more creative? Can we think of some other adjectives?
I think that our viewers know how you feel about smut, and I think that you're a little too, not sensitive, that's not the right word, but you pick up on it more as you read it. Like Karey said to me, in the first 200 pages, there's this many scenes, this much of this, da 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 da. And I got to page 200 and there was nothing.
Yes, there was. I might have exaggerated on the page number, but like it got to a point where I was like, can we move on? Where's the plot? Like, are we just gonna have sex and like?
Well, I stand by what I said. I think that was done purposely to show like that they needed all of that to get to the point where they could then communicate more about things, to be able to work through things. So
it is not smut that makes me uncomfortable. It is the language that is used to communicate smut that makes me uncomfortable. I mean, I can read smut, but like I'm sorry, you don't need to use the word cock 80,000 times in a single book. You really don't. And sure, that number is probably also an exaggeration. I'm not going to sit here and count the number of times that Sarah J. Maas uses the word cock, but still, it was just excessive to me.
So, the moral of the story from our first part, the level of spice in the book. Myself, Kayla, I'm fine with it. Could have done maybe with a little less, but it was cool. Karey, okay with it, but could have used variations of words.
Mm-hmm. Mix it up. Give me some variety.
Yeah.
Or, maybe don't use that word at all. Think of something else. It's just that word.
So we mentioned it, but Nesta has gone through a lot of difficult events, especially what we saw in A Court of Wings and Ruin. I already mentioned it. She experienced the cauldron abducting Elaine as punishment for what she took from the cauldron. She watched her father die at the hands of the King of Hybern. She was willing to die for Cassian when it was clear that his injuries were really bad. How do you think the training and the back and forth flirtation with Cassian helped Nesta to heal from the experiences during the war?
I think this is one part of this story that really mirrors what we saw with Feyre. Like they went through totally different traumas. Like I'm not trying to compare the two, but we saw that training was a way for Feyre to try to deal with what happened to her under the mountain. And training with Cassian was something that helped her work through all of her feelings. And of course, flirting with the sexiest High Lord did not hurt, right? But it is kind of different for Nesta. We kind of get this feeling that she is scared of her power and she really does not want to explore what she can do. She doesn't want someone to get hurt. And she keeps thinking about the fact that Elaine was taken by the cauldron last time she used her power. Mm-hmm. But training and the flirtation definitely mirrors what we saw with Feyre. But, Nesta is stubborn. And I think initially just going through the motions so that everybody will get off her back.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, but I do think that eventually she does benefit from the training. Mm-hmm. So you're totally right. She was super reluctant, putting it mildly. She dug her feet in so far about this, to the point of like embarrassing Cassian in front of Illyrians, like refusing to train. But we really do start to see how training and working with other people, which we'll get to that in future questions, helped her. Like having that sense of camaraderie. I think that she has isolated herself so much because of that fear, that this training was a way, like a productive way for her to start working with other people again and seeing that she really does need other people. She can't just be an island of one.
Yeah, and it's kind of apparent that the setting of the book, the House of the Wind, is kind of like the public house for the Inner Circle, and it's really where Rhys conducts all of his business related to being a High Lord, whereas the house that they live in is totally separate. But there's a library within the House of Wind that is meant to be a healing place for priestesses. And one of the priestesses that Nesta comes to know really well is Gwyn. They develop this friendship that seems a lot stronger even in the relationship that Nesta has with her own sisters. And in a way, Gwyn and an Illyrian female named Emery are much more like sisters to Nesta. Does the relationship that these three have remind you of any of the relationships that you have in your own life?
Yeah, well, so when I went to answer this question, I first thought that we were just talking about like the sisterly relationship between Nesta and then two people that were not her sisters in comparison to her actual sisters. But I think my takeaway from this is that I do have a sister that I'm very close with, which does not mirror Nesta's relationship with her sisters at this point. But I think that the important thing to note is that with families, everyone's not close all the time. Like my sister and I definitely have had points in our life where we're not as close as we are now. Now we're like best friends. I can't even explain how obsessed we are with each other. But you see this ebb and flow of relationships, but having other people, important female friendships, is something that a lot of people experience. And being in the position where I am in my life, where I don't live where my sister is, has
Mm-hmm.
created, I guess, the opportunity for me to form other friendships, almost like the idea of like the family you choose, like beyond just your blood
Yeah.
family. So I have friends in my life that I view, like sisters. Like obviously Karey is referred to as Aunt Karey for my kid. Like having those relationships that you form are just as impactful, I think.
Yeah. I feel like I can kind of empathize more with Nesta in this situation because, I have a sister. We have a decent relationship, but she's not really the first person that I would call if I needed to chat about something. And I don't really tell her everything that's going on in my life. And maybe that has to do with the fact that she's 6 years younger than me. So she can't really understand some of the things that I'm going through because she's not there in her life yet.
Yeah.
And I also feel like my sister can be, and no offense if you're listening, but she can be a little judgmental and very prone to argument. But like, I feel like I can tell you a lot about what's going on in my life. I mean, before we started recording, we were just talking about fertility, and like, that's not something I talk about with my own sister. Um, we talk about that. We talk about work. We talk about our husbands because by the time you listen to this, I will have a husband.
Yay.
But I feel like I can talk to you without you judging me, which is something I can't get from my own sister. And in that way, I can empathize with Nesta because I do think that she felt very judged by Feyre and Elaine. And then she formed these relationship with two people who went through pretty extreme trauma and was able to connect with them in that way and feel that they weren't going to judge what she has done in the past because of what happened to her in war. So I don't know. I get it. I feel like I'm more like Nesta in that respect.
Yeah, and I do think it is important to form like strong relationships outside of just your like immediate blood family. I feel like there's a lot of like life is hard, right? So there's
Mm-hmm.
need for different personalities in your life, and in this case, in this book, Nesta forming this relationship with these two women was really important because they all had been through a lot of trauma. And yes, Feyre has as well, so did Elaine. But I feel like Nesta needed someone that wasn't a part of her trauma to talk to, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So really important relationship for her and really was part of her healing process.
Yeah, I think there was one point in this book, I don't remember if it was this one or if it was in the novella, where Elaine is talking to Nesta and Feyre, and she says something along the lines of, "You guys act as if my trauma is yours and it is not, it is mine." So it was just interesting that Elaine, we kind of see her as a very soft spoken and like more of a shy personality, would have the kind of sight, if you'll excuse the pun since she's a seer, to recognize that that's what's happening and to kind of actually make Nesta think a little bit more about how she is approaching her relationship with her sisters. Um, but yeah, that kind of brings us into talking a little bit more about this relationship that Nesta has with Gwen and Emery. And this leads us to the idea of the Valkyrie. And like the Illyrians, the Valkyrie were warriors, but they were all female, as they are in Norse mythology, and they all died in the war 500 years ago. So, how does this idea of the Valkyrie, this group, how does that help Gwen and Emery and even Nesta start to heal a little bit more from their trauma?
I feel like we've kind of already touched upon it with some of our other questions, but having this training and like something to work towards, I feel like help them kind of separate from the trauma or the mental burden of it and to focus and channel their energy into something. And we saw like
Yeah, it's
gradual
like
steps.
goal setting.
Yes. Yeah. And for Gwen, in this case, she had not left the library up until the point that she came up to training.
Right.
So, like, that's a huge step in and of itself. But having these little measured things of what, like, Cassian would ask them to do was, like, step-by-step things that then almost you don't realize then what you can accomplish with all of that. So
Yeah, for sure.
I think that, accompanied with having a role model, even though they had never met the Valkyries, like, having this idea of this, like, hearing the Illyrians, so Cassian and Azrael, talk about the Valkyries and how, like, incredible they were, help these women see, like, if we work hard, we can also maybe accomplish this, or this is possible for us. So a goal, a common goal,
Yeah.
working with your friends, like these strong female ties that we're seeing. I really enjoyed all the training parts of this book.
Mm-hmm. It was really fun because at the end of the Valkyrie training, they know that they've completed it when they can cut a ribbon. So it's like this ribbon that's hanging from the ceiling, and they have to like cut it in half with a sword, which, you know, sounds easy in theory, but is apparently very difficult in practice. So this is kind of like their end goal. If they can cut the ribbon, then they're officially Valkyrie. And just a little funny snippet from this thing with the ribbon. Eventually, Gwen, I think, cuts the ribbon first, and then there's some kind of conversation with Azrael, and Az is like, "What is she even talking about?" And Nesta's like, "You're the new ribbon, Azrael." That was so funny.
That was funny. Like, Gwen's like, drive was to be able to cut this ribbon, and then she finally reached that.
Yeah.
And then Az had, like,
Now
said
she has
something.
to set something else, and it happens to be Az. And I think that that's part of the reason a lot of people ship them together, is because of that exchange. But at the same time, lots of people ship him with a character from another book as well. So
I don't view that, like, as a reason to ship them as a couple. People are gonna get mad if they listen to this and they're a big Gwen and Azrael thing, but I feel like I just don't think that that's Azrael's role in Gwen's life. I feel like he was there when he saved her, or was there at her darkest moment after she had been assaulted and watched her sister die and all this at the temple. And then he was there with her for her training, and then he's going to be there for her during this next step. I feel like, to me, I almost view it as like a brotherly thing. I don't view it as...
I think we'd have to see more. I think we'd have to see more of their conversation, more of their interactions to really know whether this is like something that could develop into a romantic thing. I mean, you know, I love a slow burn, so that's what it's gotta be.
True.
That's what it should be.
That's true.
But now we have a really good perspective on the female friendships, and we have kind of a decent perspective on the friendship between the Bat Boys. So how would you compare them? How are they similar and how are they different?
Well, so that's what I thought was another really fun aspect of this book, is because we see the trio of the Bat Boys, and then we see this trio form between Nesta and her best friends. And I love it because I already kind of talked about this, but it's the idea of that family can also be the people you choose. So I had mentioned before, you know, my husband and I, we don't live near our family. And so thankfully I have an awesome family, and I love my mom and dad and my sister so much, and they come and visit me all the time, and we FaceTime, and it's amazing. You do need people nearby. Proximity is very, very important sometimes, like the people you could call at the drop of a hat if you need something. And I have been fortunate to form that in my life. Obviously, I already mentioned with Karey, but there's other people in my neighborhood, like very important people in my life that I have met and formed very strong relationships with, because I don't live near my family. And so for these three people, both the Bat Boys and then our female characters, it's a situation where for the men, they came from maybe families that were lacking. They needed that. And then we see that then also with our female characters, where Gwen's sister was murdered. Emery's father was horrific. And Nesta is not in a great place with her own sister. So creating relationships and having family that you choose is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can all agree with the statement that the biggest way that they differ is the maturity level. I mean, it was really cute when you get this scene of, it was basically a sleepover that they were having, and Nesta is able to communicate with the House of the Wind. The house is like constantly giving her like chocolate cakes and romance novels and like stuff like that. And they start asking the house for the like dumbest little thing, like a miniature unicorn and
Yeah.
rainbows and like all of this stuff. But generally, I feel like the conversations they have are a little bit more mature, whereas the bad boys, I mean, they're boys.
Like
So,
they have a snowball fight every
yeah, which I
solstice, and
mean,
like
cool, but at the
fun.
same time, like, you're 500 years old. Let's get over that. The plot of this story does kind of continue from the previous book. So we've talked a lot about some of the relationships, but the plot itself introduces the concept of the dread trove. And there, we think, are three items. There's a crown that allows the wearer to control the minds of other people, a mask that allows the wearer to raise the dead, and a harp that allows the user to do several things like break wards, move through space, stop time. And because these objects were made, and because Nesta was made, she is enlisted to try to find this trove before the human queen Briallen can. And Briallen was one that went into the cauldron after Nesta and Elaine. And because Nesta took something from the cauldron was like, oh, these bitches ain't taking anything from me again, and turned her into an old crone. Like, she's immortal, but she's like super, super old looking. So she's trying to get revenge on Nesta, you know. Nesta does find the mask in a bog in the middle, narrowly escaping a kelpie in the process, and she sees the harp held in the prison, which is the same place that Amryn and the Bone Carver had been for thousands of years, right? This leads to a confrontation with another death god called Lanthus, initially imprisoned by Cassian. And like Nesta and Cassian go to the prison to get this harp. And then the harp opens the ward that's holding the Lanthus in his cell. So there's that confrontation. And Lanthus shows Nesta a vision. Okay, here's where we're actually going with this. Most of this vision does not matter, but she seems to see a fourth object belonging to the Dread Trove. And everybody's kind of like, never heard of a fourth. Do you have like any ideas at all what this mysterious object could it be?
No, I have no clue. No idea. I was thinking like maybe it's one of those, like, because we got introduced the idea of that Nesta made weapons that had like part of the cauldron in them, and they said that all the original made weapons like are gone, like hidden, destroy, like not destroyed because I don't think you can destroy them, but like at the bottom of an ocean, like you can't find them. They haven't been found for however long. And Nesta made weapons. So I was thinking maybe it was one of these weapons that no one knows where it is now.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
But I don't know which one or if that's even the case. I have no idea.
Yeah, it seemed like there was some kind of bone involved. So I'm kind of wondering if the bone carver had something to do with this specific item. But who knows, because that's all we got, is that it looked like
it's definitely some sort of Easter egg dropped by Sarah J. Maas that will come into play at some point.
Yeah. Why else would she put it in there? Like, if it had no purpose, it wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And honestly, I kind of like read it and forgot about it because I didn't want to think about it. And now that you posed this question, it really grinds me that I don't know what it is.
What is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, you see how I do that? I feel like I did that last time we talked about Rings and Ruin too, because of Feyre's power.
You're terrible.
I'm not terrible. I just think about things, okay?
So we've already mentioned it, but leading it back into it again, from the training, Nesta, Emery, and Gwyn are eventually able to pass this qualifying obstacle course. They didn't know what it was qualifying for, but it ends up being that they qualified for the blood rite, which we were introduced to the blood rite in previous books, but this is the initiation that Illyrian males have to undergo to be considered a full warrior for the Illyrians. Yeah. Of course, during a sleepover at Emery's house, the three girls are taken, and tossed into the blood right without Cassian's knowledge. And once you're in, no one can help you out until the 3 days, it's 3 days, I think, is over. And that is it. So these 3 ladies are tossed into it. What do we think about the events of the blood right?
I mean, it's good and bad. The whole thing is there's no magic, and if you're Illyrian, your wings are bound. But of course, Nesta and Gwyn are not Illyrian, and Emery actually had her wings, what do they call it? Clipped. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she can't actually use her wings, which is freaking dumb. Who does that? That's like mutilation. But anyway, somehow there's like magic that still persists, because remember that sleepover I was saying where they were asking the house for dumb things like rainbow unicorns and stuff? They made friendship bracelets, and somehow Nesta was able to like actually make, like she made the little charms so that now the charms are magic. So they find each other, which is, I mean, it's good because they're intentionally separated. Freaking Illyrian. What was his name? I don't even remember his name. It's pointless. But it's kind of strange to me because I feel like these, for Nesta, it doesn't surprise me. But for Gwyn, it kind of surprises me that she would be at all violent, because she just generally strikes me as like a much more pacifist person. Like she wouldn't want to hurt anyone, and I understand at a certain point it's for your own protection, like it's self-defense, but it just felt weird for Gwyn to be involved in that.
I agree a little bit, but I also think like they are put in a situation where it's kill or be killed, so I feel like some of that kicks in. My big issue was that I didn't think that Gwyn would be in a mental place to handle this. She had the only time she even left the library was to go to training, and then it was a huge deal that she showed up at Emery's house, and she was like nervous and kind of shaking about that.
That's the first time she'd ever even left the House of Wind, because they were training at the House of Wind.
So to me, it felt jarring that then all of a sudden she was dropped into the blood right with a bunch of scary men.
Yeah, who are trying to kill her and who have a culture of like women are inferior, and I don't know how she didn't have a breakdown. I would have.
Me neither. So that part didn't really sit well with me. It didn't quite feel like it meshed with what we had learned of the character yet. But I think in regards to showing the women fighting to get back to each other, and it was definitely like a culmination of all their training. Like I enjoyed that part, but I just something just wasn't quite 100% for me with that.
Yeah, and then at the end, the ending kind of mirrors like this legend that Illyrians have, where there was a war and this male stood in basically like a bottleneck and like let his friends escape while he fought all of the enemies. And then like
he drew the line in the sand.
And, Nesta decides that she's gonna stand. It happens to be at the same exact bottleneck area of the mountain, while Emery and Gwyn try to get to the top and touch the monolith, which they do. Good for them. But this is kind of where we get our final confrontation with the queen, with Brialyn. She has taken over Cassian's mind, which is, I mean, like, heart clenching a little bit, because like she could literally make Cassian do anything. She's wearing the crown. And she's also taking control of a couple of the Illyrian males. But anyway, how'd you feel about the conclusion to this bit of the plot, this kind of struggle that they've been having with Brialyn to...
You knew it was going to come to a head somewhere.
Yeah.
There was something dissatisfying about this being the outcome.
Yeah. It was very lackluster.
It was. I do feel like that maybe this wasn't the biggest plot of the story. I feel like the biggest plot was like Nesta coming together with these women and all that. So if you view it from that perspective, Nesta laid down everything to
Yeah.
save her female friendship. So that feels really nice. But
The
then I
plot
also
that
was,
like continues from the previous books is just such an undercurrent, and
yeah,
then it comes to a head and it's like, okay, like Cassian could withstand the mind control, of course he could, and like Nesta just dusted her and like that's it, now it's over. It was very underwhelming, this part of the plot, and it's like, where
and
does it
then
go now at this point, you know?
I know, and you know what else kind of did bug me? Because we'll get to it in a little bit for what Nesta does for her sister, but we see Nesta make this huge sacrifice for Gwyn and Emery. And so Gwyn and Emery reach the top of the mountain and now they're considered like full Illyrian,
Mm-hmm.
and Nesta didn't. And I don't know why, but that really bugs me.
Yeah, I think that was kind of supposed to mirror what happened with Reese as and Cassian, because when they first went into the blood right, or I guess you only do it once, when they participated, they were also intentionally separated and they fought to come together and they fought to get to the top of the mountain. And it was like, what, 10 people in history had ever made it to the top and actually touched the monolith? But it's like Nesta, she obviously has the strongest magic, and she has so much will, you know? But for her to be like left behind, I understand the whole I'm gonna protect my people thing, but like, why couldn't she go? Like, why?
Yeah, it just, I don't know, it doesn't feel good. And I guess not every book needs to end with all the rainbows and sunshines, but
Yeah, they don't all
it
have to be
just,
like pretty little bows at the end, I guess, but
yeah, this one, it just didn't sit right with me either.
mm.
I think we're in agreement.
Yeah, so in this story, we also get a confrontation between Nesta and Feyre, because we mentioned that Nesta made some magic blades. She made 3 of them. And the inner circle decides to vote on whether they should tell Nesta that she made these blades. Nesta finds out about this vote. So she decides to tell Feyre that they also decided to vote not to tell her that the baby that she's carrying is probably going to kill her because it has wings, and Feyre is not made to birth babies with wings. Do you think it was right of Nesta to reveal this information?
No, I mean, no. So Feyre needed to know the
I agree
information,
with that for sure.
but the delivery and the person
Mm-hmm.
delivering the message was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It should have been resand, and it should have been
Yes.
done a while ago.
She revealed it for a very like malicious
Spiteful reason,
reason.
yeah.
Yeah, we see time and time again that Nesta is, instead of like letting herself get hurt, she decides to lash out at other people first.
Yeah.
So the fact that she was hurt by this, the fact that they even voted, meant that she had to lash out at someone. And I guess the only dirt she really had was that Feyre could die because of this pregnancy.
Yeah.
So
It was real, reading that scene was really messy, and it actually hurt my heart as I was reading it.
yeah,
I didn't like that at all.
I definitely think
because it
Feyre needed
hurt.
to know for sure.
Feyre did, but like saying it like that and doing it like that hurt Feyre, and it hurt Nesta. Like as soon as she did it, she was like gutted about it.
Yeah.
So, Rhysand should have. This is the one time that I will say anything bad about Rhysand, was that he did not handle this well.
I didn't really love his character in this book. It didn't feel like the Rhys we'd seen in all of the other books previously. Like, he can be secretive to a point, but I do feel like something like this he would not have intentionally kept from Feyre, knowing that at the end of book 3 they made this bargain that if any of them die, they're going to die together. So like if Feyre dies giving birth to this baby, literally the whole family is going to die, Rhys, the kid, Feyre, everybody's dead because this bargain. But it just didn't feel like him to keep this kind of thing from her.
Yeah, I think the point was to like, I feel as though felt guilty, like it was his fault that the baby had wings. So he like internalized it and didn't handle it right, like the stressors of becoming a dad, and that his wife was in danger because of him. But I agree with you. I don't feel like that's how he would have handled this, because everything that he's ever done in all the other books is always giving Feyre like the choice.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't quite add up for who he is.
And
So
also, I have a question. How are they like super scientifically advanced? Like Reese has this floating globe of the entire universe in his office, but they can't do C-sections?
I think it's because of like the healing, like how they heal. So like to cut, they start to heal before they can get to the baby, maybe, was what I was understanding from it. My other thing is that Feyre was in Illyrian form when they conceived the baby, but then they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't let her use her magic to go back to Illyrian form. Like, I don't get why they couldn't have done that.
Yeah. They
Like, I feel
wouldn't
like,
let her use any of her magic, which I feel like is dumb.
yeah,
Like how
I
many centuries have Fae women been giving birth to babies and using their magic while they're pregnant? So like what is that?
I felt like that was just done for this moment of at the end of the book, which we're about to talk to. I feel like they did that so Nesta could have like a redeeming moment with her sisters, but I feel
Uh-huh.
as though Feyre should have just used her magic, and it probably would have been
Yeah.
fine.
I mean, I guarantee you it is not a common medical practice for women to not use their magic when they're pregnant.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
That's just
But this
like
brings us,
dumb.
yeah, agreed. This brings us to the end of the book where Feyre goes into labor 2 months early. It's not going well. As we said, the baby had wings. Feyre's anatomy is not set up to birth a baby that has wings. And at this point, Nesta wants to be part of the inner circle and wants to participate in society. She is distraught, sitting here looking at Feyre dying and the baby dying.
Mm-hmm.
And she now has all three parts of the Dread Trove, and it seems like she's the only one who can use them and be released from them. So she puts on the crown, puts on the mask, holds the harp, and she plucks the last string, which ends up having the ability to temporarily stop time.
Mm-hmm.
And Nesta goes into 100% humble mode and begs the cauldron to help her. She offers back the power to the cauldron. And of course, the cauldron accepts because it's greedy, 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 and that's all it's
Yeah.
wanted.
Yeah. The whole time.
And it wants to take all the power back. But something prevents the cauldron from taking all of the power back, and something is still left in Nesta. What do you think it was, and how do you think this will play a role in future books?
So we know that every time they talk about any type of deity like being, it's usually either the cauldron or the mother. So it's interesting because Nesta has kind of heard this voice in her head a few times in the past. So it seems like maybe the mother has been guiding her since she became Fae, and maybe it was the mother that actually gave her the strength to rip part of the cauldron's power away while she was turning. And I kind of like the idea that the mother will continue to guide Nesta, but we also don't really know what the motivations are for this. So, like, why is the mother so involved with Nesta if this
Yeah,
is the mother?
I said the same thing, that I do think it's the mother. I am choosing to view the mother as like a nurturing entity. I think it's going to be a positive thing. I think that it's also the mother that helped create the house as being like a living entity for Nesta.
Mm-hmm.
So I am viewing whatever was left in her to be a positive thing and done from a positive place from the mother.
So
to
you
what
don't
end,
think
I
it's
am not sure.
you don't think it's like that scary death power that everybody sees in her eyes when she gets mad. You think it's something
I mean,
calm.
it could be. No, it could be, but I don't think that it's done to create harm.
I'm
I
interested
don't
to
know how to
see
explain it.
how this plays out with the cauldron, though, because Nesta essentially made a bargain with the cauldron and was like, I will give you back all the power if you help me save Feyre. And all that power was not given back. So I don't know.
But Nesta would have given it. Something else stopped it. So I feel like the cauldron's issue is going to be with the something else, which is the mother. So maybe it's mother versus cauldron. I don't know.
Thank you.
We'll see.
We will. So in our next episode, we're going to be discussing The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. It was a pretty popular book last year on the social media sphere, and I personally have been wanting to get to it and just haven't yet. So we're going to give that a go, and we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, should be a good one. And thanks everyone for tuning in. If you enjoyed the conversation today, go ahead, listen to some of our previous episodes. Hop over to Instagram and maybe leave us, I'm thinking the red diamond for this one to represent Cassian's siphons.
Sure.
As the emoji for this episode. And comment, leave us questions, anything. Just interact with us. We're happy to be there. We like chatting with all of you. And thank you again for listening today. We'll talk to you guys again soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.